morning. I would invite you to join in singing our Music for Gathering, which this morning is hymn number 380, the words to which can be found in today's order of service. Rejoice in love we know and share, in love and beauty everywhere. Rejoice in truth that makes us free, and in the good that yet shall be. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, a presence in this community since 1865. My name is Dusty Francis, and I serve this congregation as Director of Music Ministries. We are so grateful that you have chosen to join us online today, and we encourage yourself to introduce yourself in the chat. For those of you joining us for the first or second time and are still getting to know us, please consider completing our newcomer survey at uuaa.org/newcomer survey to allow us to best connect you to your interests at UUAA. Following today's worship, all are invited to stay online for our congregational meeting. As we move more deeply into this time of shared worship, let us consider the words of Jacob Trapp. If it is language that makes us human, one half of language is to listen. Silence can exist without speech, but speech cannot live without silence. Listen to the speech of others. Listen even more to their silence. To pray is to listen to the revelations of nature, to the meaning of events. To listen to music is to listen also to silence, and to find the stillness deepened and enriched. We are gathered in community. We are gathered for worship.
Wherever you are watching from, I invite you to find a candle or a chalice so you can participate in this part of our liturgy from afar. Now, sometimes candles or chalices are just not within reach, but that doesn't exclude you from lighting one. I bet you have a phone nearby. And you can download the Worship Web app that's provided by the UUA, and there you have a virtual chalice, and you can light it and extinguish it by just tapping the chalice. I know you can't see this very well, but you can look that up. You can also use your hands to indicate a chalice, like this, or like this, and you always have your imagination. So imagine the chalice, and then imagine it lit. Especially on a day we are holding a congregational meeting, we need to have the communal experience of lighting a chalice, a reminder that we bring our best selves to whatever is at hand. It is in that spirit I ask Stella to light the chalice as you light yours in whatever form it may take. And as we say together, we light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. We light this chalice for the harmony of peace. Thank you. Now please keep your chalice lit during the meeting which follows right after this service. We also remind ourselves each week of how we want to be in relationship with each other through the words of our congregation's covenant. I invite you to speak the words out loud, even if you are just by yourself or with one other person. There is power in our spoken word and strength in the collective voice we have, even when not physically together. So let us say together, The spirit of this church is love, and service is its law. This is our covenant with each other, to dwell together in peace, to search for truth in love, and to help one another.
For a long time, when someone asked me why I'm a Unitarian Universalist, I would launch into a long-winded, meandering speech about social justice issues, finding like-minded people that shared my values, and opportunities for activism, among many, many other reasons. As the Reverend Fred Smalls writes, quote, "Many Unitarian Universalists suffer from a chronic identity crisis. People ask us, what do Unitarian Universalists believe? And we freeze. We don't know what to say, because Unitarian Universalists believe so many things, so many different things," end quote. Thankfully, I have a much more concise elevator pitch now. I am a Unitarian Universalist because I believe we can make the world a safer, healthier, happier place when we are grounded in community, centered on justice, and lifted by love. This is why we come back again and again: community, justice, and love. Our story for all ages reminds us that every time we fly a pride flag, every time we provide pastoral care to someone in need, every time we volunteer to tend to the memorial garden, every time we warmly welcome a new family, every time we engage in deep conversation about the big challenges we face, every time we find meaning and joy in worship together, every time we offer a smile or a wave, we are engaging in an act of love. It is actually profoundly simple. I am a UU because I side with love. And love grows everywhere. Story by Barry Timms, illustrations by Tisha Lee. Love grows everywhere. From country farm to city square, from desert village, hot and dry, to mountain home where eagles fly. Love grows any place. It doesn't need a fancy space. No matter if the walls are bare, love only needs our thought and care. Yes, thought and care are all love needs to help it grow like tiny seeds that might seem nothing much at first, till up into the light they burst. Love will find a way to brighten any cloudy day. A gentle hug, a perfect kiss, a song to bring back times you miss. A moment shared, a helping hand when things don't turn out quite as planned. A funny joke to bring good cheer, a kind word whispered in your ear. Love grows on the street and reaches out to those we meet. A neighbor from across the way, a friend from school who'd like to play. But there are others we might see who need our help or charity. As flowers turn toward the sun, love's friendly smile greets everyone. Love lifts hearts and minds and comes in many different kinds. The kind that grows in peace and shade, the kind too bright to ever fade. There's love so great it fills the room, and love that takes its time to bloom. But each is precious from the start, a miracle that melts the heart. Love may hide away when times are hard and skies are gray, when hope seems nowhere to be found or buried under stony ground. But if we're brave, perhaps we'll dare to show how much we really care. A kind of magic happens then, and love begins to grow again. Love grows everywhere, enough for all, a gift to share, budding, branching, leaves unfurled. Love will make a brighter world. The end.
Thank you, Stella. That was a beautiful and moving story. This Sunday, as we gather, I'm particularly aware that in about 2.5 weeks or so, our denomination will be gathering in its annual General Assembly, and it has a major item of business before it. If you are not aware of this or haven't heard of it before, there's a review process that has been underway for a couple of years now. That'll be voted on in its last and final vote to determine if, as a movement, as Unitarian Universalists writ large, whether we have some new guiding statements that describe who and what we're about. Recognizing that we're headed into some big decisions for our tradition as a whole, for Unitarian Universalism as a whole later this month, I wanted to today focus with you a little bit on the history of ideas in Unitarian Universalism, in particular, our principles and values. I know this is a topic that has been of interest to many in our community as this review process about our statements, it's called Article 2. As that process has been underway, a lot of us have been thinking about this. I wanted, by the way, to commend, these were two things that I went deeply into in preparation for today. A book by Warren Ross called The Premise and the Promise, and another one by Ed Frost called With Purpose and Principle. These are excellent books that cover some key Unitarian and Universalist history, required reading in seminary back in the day when I was in seminary. Now the challenge is, and this was alluded to earlier in today's service, it is viewed in the broader culture that we Unitarian Universalists can believe anything at all. And we see this culturally in places like The Simpsons or Prairie Home Companion, where they somewhat routinely poke fun at us UUs as being wishy-washy. Yet, there's some measure of truth in this, in that we are a broad movement, especially on the Unitarian side of the family. And that particular side, the Unitarian side, but truly us together as Unitarian Universalists, we have struggled consistently with articulating what holds us together and what we hold in common. Now, I could easily have started this history of ideas 1,500 years ago or so, or even 200 years ago or 150 years ago. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to start a lot closer in, but know that it's possible to look at our whole history as Unitarians, Universalists, and together in a very long arc and trajectory of intellectual ideas to which we remain deeply connected. I'm going to start us off in 1959, however, much closer to our present time. 1959, the two denominations, the Unitarians and the Universalists, met in Syracuse. This was the culmination of a couple of years' worth of effort at exploring what we colloquially call a merger, but was actually a consolidation, what a consolidation of the two denominations could look like. They met in parallel to try and arrive at certain understandings around how that might move forward. Quite predictably, the Unitarians, who have always been fond of wordsmithing, nearly jettisoned the whole thing and remained in official session until 1:30 in the morning on a particular late night because they couldn't agree on wording that they desired. Now, the confusion around wording was not anything new to the Unitarian side of the family. This was ongoing, and it showed up in the context of needing to figure out who we are going to be alongside the Universalists. The Unitarians had been struggling with, how do you include theists and humanists under the same umbrella? Through some late night wrangling, mostly amongst clergy who were men, they arrive at some kind of tentative formulation that continues in process for 3 years. You'll hear this number again and again. We seem to like 3 years worth of process around stuff. Officially, the first articulation of principles is adopted in 1961. It's a mishmash. By the way, that's the year that the two denominations consolidated and became Unitarian Universalism. And the original articulation of what was called principles was a mishmash. It was a lumping together of what today we know as both the principles and the sources. So when we are together and you open up your gray hymnals, there's usually a listing of both of those. And those two things were blended together, not separated, and just seamlessly one piece of statement, one articulation of a statement. They drew heavily on a Unitarian statement that emerged in the 1940s. It had a couple of key concepts in it, such as a commitment to democracy, a commitment to individual freedom of conscience. It drew on a statement of Unitarian principles that had pre-existed, and so it was viewed as having continuity with what we had been previously, prior to this consolidation of the two denominations. Soon after being adopted in 1961, that original articulation, by the way, which included a concept of love as well, I should note, came under heavy criticism for what it left out. As I alluded to, the people who drafted the first articulation were, by and large, men, and they were clergy. That leaves out a whole lot of perspectives. It leaves out the perspectives of the laity, and it leaves out the perspective of women. In the 1970s, there were efforts, particularly by a group called Women in Religion, to change the sexist language in this articulation of who we are. In 1979, the then president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Eugene Pickett, gave his kind of official push in this direction that we needed to look at all of this. He said, quote, "Our deeper malaise lies in our confusion as to what word we have to spread. The old watchwords of liberalism, freedom, reason, and tolerance, worthy though they may be, are simply not catching the imagination of the contemporary world. They describe a process for approaching the religious depths, but they do not testify to an intimate acquaintance with the depths themselves." That was President Eugene Pickett's attempt to say, we need to be relevant to the times that we are in. It is the mid to late 1970s. We are in the midst of the feminist revolution. Pay attention. That led to an amendment being brought by the same group, Women in Religion, to the 1981 General Assembly that would have not just changed the sexist language in the original formulation of the principles, it would have changed some other things that needed updating as well. This startled groups that weren't really clear, like what was happening and what all these changes might mean. And in a deft political maneuver, sleight of hand, one of my mentors in Unitarian Universalism, Denny Davidoff, now deceased, but who at the time was president of the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation, she brought forward a compromise proposal to create a commission to look at an overhaul of the statements altogether. That commission, which was comprised of 7 individuals, met, surprise, for 3 years and brought to successive General Assemblies in 1984 and 1985 a complete rewrite, total rethinking of our core statements of what was holding us together. Yet, they were in continuity with all that had preceded. Key concepts were retained. Democratic process did not magically disappear. The drawing on and supporting individual conscience did not magically disappear. Those things remained in continuity, and we see them expressed in the current form that we have, the principles and the sources, now separated out again. As soon as those were adopted, or shortly thereafter, we UUs love to critique things. So the critique began again. Well, we've adopted these things in 1985, but so many things were left out. What are we going to do about all the things that were left out, all the needs and perspectives that weren't taken into account in 1985? This resulted in the next attempt to revise and change our core statements, which occurred in 2006. Another, you guessed it, 3-year process resulted in a vote in 2009 to consider whether we might change our core statements again. And what was under consideration at that time, I'll give you a little bit of a flavor. We talk about the inherent worth and dignity of each person. People were saying, rightfully so, UUs were saying, what about all beings? We say we have an interdependent connection to the planet around us. That definitely implies the environment. Does it mean the animal life? It doesn't necessarily say animal life. It's kind of implied, but can't we say all beings? Simultaneously, people were asking questions about the sources. We have all these traditional, very religious, quote-unquote, sources named and some scientific and humanistic ones. But what about things like art and music? What about those kinds of sources? And won't the sources evolve with time? Yes, they would. New ones may emerge. Won't our ethics, i.e. the principles, won't those also evolve over time? These were some of the questions that came up, and there was an attempt to adapt the existing principles and sources. The vote came up, the first of what would have been 2 votes in 2009, and on the first ballot, that proposal failed. We did not update our principles in 2009, principles and sources in 2009. This led to some deep soul searching. What had we missed? Such a thoughtful effort was underway. People had raised very good questions that were worthy of consideration. What had we missed? With time, we began to understand a couple of things. The principles, which are essentially ethical statements, ethics are not static. Ethics do change. The sources of what we can draw on for inspiration in our lives, of course, is going to evolve and change as the world around us evolves and changes. We began to see that both our ethical statements and sources might require continual updating. A question emerged of, well, what supports those principles and sources? Is there something deeper that we could draw on that supports these changing, ever-evolving concepts? Simultaneously, we began to understand as we were looking at the larger arc of our history, this is especially true on the Unitarian side of the family, the attempts to redefine ourselves, the attempts to come up with new ways of describing who we are, was always driven by the need for inclusion. Some group of people was pointing out, but I don't see myself in what we currently have. Now, it has also always been the case when this question emerges that there are people who perfectly well see themselves in the existing statements. I promise you that in the late 70s and early 80s, there were a lot of men who thought the existing statements were just fine because they were included. That didn't mean that everybody we sought to have included was actually included. So the question before us was not, do you personally already feel included, but what are we hearing in our movement from those who don't see themselves in our core statements? Whenever we have revised our core understandings of who we are as Unitarian Universalists, it is always in service to further inclusivity, to helping others in our movement and those not yet in our movement see themselves in it. So with these understandings, we launched on a new process that you got it if you guessed it. It took 3 years. It was another 3-year process that has resulted in the votes that went before our General Assembly last year, and the final vote is in 2.5 weeks. These votes, the proposal that our Article 2 Revision Commission has brought forward is that recognizing that ethics and sources evolve and change with time, recognizing that we will always be expanding who we want to include at the table, perhaps a deeper articulation of who we are as Unitarian Universalists may be grounded in the deeper values that have informed our movement for hundreds, if not maybe even 1,000+ years, the intellectual tradition that we belong to for hundreds, if not even 1,000+ years. And those values are, there's 7 of them, we like the number 7 too: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, generosity, and love. There is tons of written material on what these 7 values might mean to us as Unitarian Universalists. And as always, with everything you get to decide how these deeper values influence your life and what they might mean in your life journey. As we move towards the votes that will be taking place in a couple of weeks, I want to remind us as a community of several really important things. I take nothing for granted. I have no idea what the outcome of the vote will be in 2.5 weeks. For those who have felt strongly and personally that this is a beautiful revision to our core statements that needs to happen, that you see yourself fundamentally in this new version, if for any reason they are not passed, please hold in your heart the knowledge that it is embedded in our history that the changes that we yearn for and need sometimes take time, and that the efforts put towards such are never wasted. They're never wasted. We learn along the way. So I invite you, if that's the place where we wind up in 2.5 weeks, please hold that and know that in your hearts. For those who have had trepidation or uncertainty or just don't want these revisions to happen, I offer to you I hope it's a balm, that if you look at the longer arc of our tradition, historical arc of our tradition, it is possible to not just know, but deeply see that we are always in continuity with these core, deeper values. Know that we are not going to fundamentally become something we have never been. That is not the goal or the aim of this effort, nor any preceding effort at revising what our core statements are. At each point in time, we have sought to articulate who we already are and aspirationally who we're striving to be. I invite you to be present to that continuity and hold that continuity in your heart. It is something we can trust. Knowing the commitment, the care, and passion we all bring to our Unitarian Universalist faith, I invite us to hold that deeply and well in our hearts as we move into, soon, a time of congregational meeting and gathering.
From wherever you are, I invite you to join in singing our final hymn, number 1058, Be Ours a Religion, the words for which can be found in today's order of service.
Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love.
Hold in your heart that grounding of love, of knowing the deeper well springs of who we are. Hold it deeply and well. It is the core that holds all the other values that define our Unitarian Universalist journey together. Love. May we enter into our congregational meeting knowing that, holding that, and being that.